The forest at the edge of Thornhollow had a way of swallowing sounds, turning the world into a hushed secret, where even your own footsteps felt like intrusions. That afternoon, the quiet pressed in heavier than usual, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I'd felt it before, right before a storm rolled in or a wolf pack circled too close, but this time it wasn't the weather or beasts. It was something else, something that would crack my small, forgotten life wide open. I trudged along the familiar path, my boots sinking into the damp earth, the weight of a day's work pulling at my shoulders. The bag slung over my back held little a few bundles of kindling, some wild mushrooms I'd foraged, and half a loaf of stale rye bread, the last of my rations until I could trade in the village tomorrow. Hunger gnawed at my gut, but it was an old companion, one I'd learned to ignore. Life on the fringes taught you that. My home was a modest wooden cabin tucked away half an hour's walk from Eldermore village. It wasn't much to boast about, a sagging thatched roof walls patched with whatever scraps I could find after last winter's winds had cracked the joints, and a fickle hearth that smoked more than it warmed. But it was mine, the only thing left after the fire that raised my father's sawmill and dragged our family name into the mud. The villagers didn't hate me outright. They just preferred to forget I existed. After the blaze, someone had to take the blame, and as the surviving son, I fit the role perfectly. I called myself Taryn Vale back then, though few bothered with my name anymore. I scraped by chopping firewood, setting rabbit snares, gathering herbs and fungi, and occasionally mending fences for the villagers, in exchange for flour salt or a bit of lard. It kept me fed mostly. No wife, no kin, no grand ambitions. Just survival one quiet day bleeding into the next. As I passed the hollow oak and the blackthorn thicket, a shape caught my eye slumped against a tree trunk. At first I mistook it for a fallen log uprooted by the recent rains. But then it stirred. It was an orc woman. She sat crumpled on the ground, her back rigid against the bark as if refusing to fully collapse even in exhaustion. Her skin was a deep, shadowed green, paled by what looked like days of hardship. Leather armor hung in tatters over her broad-framed shoulder pieces, missing straps frayed, stained with dried mud and old blood. A metal bracelet etched with intricate patterns glinted faintly on her wrist, half buried in the dirt as if she'd tried to conceal it. Her high boots were split at the toes, evidence of a long, grueling trek. She was tall, nearly my height, even seated, built like a warrior who'd faced more battles than I could imagine. Tusks curved slightly from her lower jaw, sharp, but not menacing in that moment. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. They were amber bright and unyielding, locked on me with the wariness of a wounded animal that hadn't yet surrendered. No plea, no weakness, just raw vigilance. I froze my hand, instinctively tightening on the axe at my belt. From childhood I'd heard the Tales orcs were fierce, unpredictable, eternal foes of men. Raiders from the northern clans, they'd spill over the borders in times of strife, leaving villages in ashes. Protocol was clear sound, the alarm run or fight if you had to. But standing there, I saw no monster. I saw hollow cheeks clinging to bone lips cracked from thirst, a body pushed to its limits. She spoke first, her voice rough like grinding stones. "I have eaten nothing for many days." The words hung there, simple and stark. Admitting such vulnerability must have cost her. For someone like her, pride was armor thicker than steel. I didn't move at first. My mind raced with warnings, the village elders' stories of orc scouts heralding war parties, the suspicious glares I'd face if anyone found out. I was poor, isolated trouble like this could end me. But then I remembered my own hungers, the empty nights after the mill burned when I'd scavenged roots and begged scraps. Hunger didn't care about race or enmity. It stripped you bare. Without thinking, because thinking would have stopped me, I reached into my bag and pulled out the half loaf of bread. It was hard, speckled with mold at the edges, but it was all I had. I broke off a small piece and ate it in front of her, proving it wasn't poisoned. Then I extended the rest. "I only have this much," I said, "but take it." She stared at the bread as if it were a trick, her eyes searching mine for deceit. When I didn't withdraw my hand, she reached out slowly. Her fingers were large, calloused from wielding weapons, yet they handled the loaf with surprising care, as if afraid to crush something so fragile. She ate the first bite, deliberately savoring it. The second came faster. By the time she finished, her eyes closed briefly, a flicker of relief crossing her face like her body was remembering what it felt like to live. "Why?" she asked, her voice steadier now. I shrugged. Because I know what hunger feels like. She didn't respond immediately, just watched me. I unslung my water skin and offered it next. She drank deeply, her lips trembling slightly. Then she tried to stand, bracing against the tree, but her arm buckled and she slumped back down. That's when I noticed the unnatural heat radiating from her, the way her side hitched with each breath. She was wounded, not just hungry. You need shelter, I said. I need no pity. It's not pity. If you stay here another half night, the wolves will smell you before I do. She pressed her lips, thin pride flaring in her eyes, but her body betrayed her again. She attempted to rise once more and nearly toppled forward. I caught her instinctively, my arm slipping under hers to steady her. She was heavier than I'd expected, her frame solid despite the weakness. She didn't fight me off. Instead, she whispered, as if forcing the words through her unyielding will, I am Kara. Taryn, I replied. And somehow in that moment, as I draped her arm over my shoulder and guided her stumbling steps through the winding path toward my rundown cabin, I knew my life wouldn't slip back into its quiet poverty. I'd invited in more than a stranger. I'd invited change, the kind that reshapes everything. The path back to my cabin dragged on longer than any I'd walked before. Normally, it was a straightforward half-hour trek, but with Kara's weight leaning on me, every step felt labored, her breaths coming in ragged pulls against my side. She tried not to rely too heavily, her pride keeping her spine straight, even as her legs faltered. I could feel the heat of fever through her armor, the way her muscles trembled under the strain. Up close, she smelled of earth and blood, a wild mix that reminded me how far out of my depth I was. We reached the door as the light began to fade the cabin's silhouette, a dim comfort against the encroaching dusk. I pushed it open with my free shoulder, guiding her inside. The place looked even shabbier. In that moment, the uneven table propped up with a stack of old books, the small hearth cold and ashen shelves holding jars of dried herbs and a few rusted tools. No luxuries, no secrets, just the bare bones of a life I'd scraped together. I eased her onto the edge of the bed, the frame creaking under her size. She scanned the room with those sharp amber eyes, taking in every detail like a scout assessing enemy territory. I didn't blame her. Trust wasn't something you handed out freely in these parts, especially not to a stranger from across the divide. I knelt by the hearth, striking flint to kindle a fire. Sparks caught on the dry tinder flames, licking up slowly. You need warmth. I muttered more to fill the silence than anything. She didn't reply, but I felt her gaze on my back as I fetched a pot and filled it with water from the barrel. Where are you hurt? I asked once the water was heating. It's nothing. I've heard that before. Usually right before someone collapses from fever. She met my eyes, a mix of irritation and surprise flickering there. Maybe she wasn't used to being challenged like that. After a long pause, she lifted the torn edge of her leather armor at her side. The wound was ugly, a long gash that had scabbed over crudely, but was now swollen red-hot to the touch. Dirt and grime crusted the edges. It hadn't been properly cleaned in days. I cursed under my breath. Left like this, infection would finish what hunger had started. I need to clean this. You're no healer. And you're sitting in the home of a poor woodcutter in the middle of nowhere. We don't have better options. That seemed to amuse her, or at least make her see reason. She nodded faintly. I tore a strip from an old undershirt, then ground some yarrow and comfrey from my jars with a pinch of salt, mixing it into a paste, just like my father had taught me before the mill took him. Kara endured the cleaning with a stoicism that bordered on unnerving. As I wiped away the filth and applied the poultice, her body tensed, but she didn't make a sound. Her hand gripped the bed frame so hard the wood groaned. By the time I bandaged it with clean cloth, sweat beaded on her forehead, her breaths shallow. I turned to the pot, adding carrots, dried beans, and the last scraps of venison jerky to make a thin soup. As it simmered, her eyes followed me again. You live alone, she asked, her voice still rough. Yes. No wife, no family. None. Why? The question was blunt, probing at the core like an orc might direct, no room for evasion. I stirred the soup, buying time. My father died in a mill fire. After that, everything fell apart. I moved to the edge of the forest. She nodded, no empty sympathies. Just acknowledgement, like someone who tasted loss herself and knew better than to poke at it. I ladled the soup into bowls, handing her one. And you, an orc like you, shouldn't be starving in human woods. Her expression darkened slightly. She took a few sips before answering. Someone wants me gone. Who? Someone with the same blood. I sat on the floor near the fire with my own bowl, the warmth seeping into my bones. If they're hunting you, I need to know how bad it is. Bad enough that if you're afraid you should send me away now? I met her gaze. If I was going to send you away, I'd have left you under that oak. For the first time, her look softened just a fraction like a crack in stone. She finished the soup, then leaned back against the wall, exhaustion claiming her. I spread a blanket on the floor by the hearth for myself. Before sleep came, I barred the door with a wooden beam and kept my crossbow within reach. She noticed but said nothing. That night, I woke to her muttering in Orcish fever dreams, twisting her words. A name repeated amid the delirium, one I didn't understand, but knew carried weight. I sat by her bed, changing cool cloths on her forehead, listening to the wind batter the walls. In that quiet, I realized I'd brought more than a wounded stranger home. I'd invited a pursuit, a storm that could swallow us both. The fever gripped her for 2 full days. Mornings I'd slip out to check snares and chop wood close by, never straying far. Evenings blurred into nights of tending, forcing herbal water down her throat, wiping sweat, stirring more broth. She thrashed at times, her strength flaring even in weakness, but I held her steady. Worry gnawed at me, not just for her, but for the village whispers that might follow if anyone spotted me buying extra supplies. By the 3rd day, the fever broke. She sat up weaker but alert, watching me skin a rabbit at the table as if committing the motions to memory. On the 4th, she braced against the wall and tried to stand, nearly toppling a stool in her haste. I told you to rest another 2 days, I said. I've rested enough. You're still staggering. Staggering is better than lying like the dead. I didn't argue further. She wasn't the type to heed orders out of care. She listened when it made sense and pushed otherwise. From then on, a new rhythm settled in the cabin. I'd head into the woods for traps and firewood. She'd stay behind boiling water, sorting the wild greens I'd gathered, attempting to cook in her way. Her first efforts were disastrous. She scorched a pot of beans, chopped roots too large, salted like feeding an army. But she adapted fast. By week's end, her stews were richer, more flavorful than anything I'd managed alone in years. In return, I showed her how the villagers smoked meat to last the winter, how to identify herbs from my father's old book, how to tie snares without mangling the animal's leg. She avoided the book at first, but one evening I caught her holding the worn history tome, frowning as she traced the words like battling an unfamiliar foe. You read? I asked. Yes. Not many orcs in these parts know the common tongue script. She set the book down, eyeing me steadily. Not many humans in these parts know an orc princess is taught 4 languages and the histories of 3 dynasties. I went still. She'd said it casually, almost deliberately, like she'd grown tired of the secret. Princess Kara closed her eyes briefly as if regretting the slip, but then she opened them unflinching. I am Kara Ironthorn, 3rd daughter of the late King Drogath of Ironreach. I laughed dryly, shock bubbling up. Then I'm the Emperor of the South. Do you think I just... I glanced at the bracelet she'd cleaned the day before. Under the firelight, its etchings gleamed too finely for a common warrior. I recalled her precise speech, her grip on a knife, not crude, but refined, the way she'd hidden the band. Someone with the same blood. I stopped laughing. So who's after you? My brother, Vorak. She spoke slowly, peeling back layers like skin from a scar. After their father's death, Vorak seized the throne and began eliminating rivals. One sister forced into a distant marriage, a brother accidented on a hunt. Kara, popular with the border troops and lesser clans, became the prime threat. Vorak tried wedding her to a cruel old general. When she refused, assassins followed. She slew them and fled Ironreach with scant possessions, aiming for the Stonewater clan in the north for aid. But Vorak's hunters caught up at the border. Wounded in the escape, she plunged into Thornhollow human lands where orcs rarely ventured. I thought I'd die under that oak, she whispered. I sat silent for a long time. Part of me wanted to rage at her for dragging such weight into my life unspoken. Another part understood if I were her, I'd hide too. Trust wasn't freely given. And now I asked. Assuming you heal. What then? Kara stared into the fire. If I regain strength, I'll press on to Stonewater. If not, I'll die here, but at least not by Vorak's hand. I didn't like how casually she spoke of death, like commenting on the weather. Maybe because I'd heard too many say it before they truly went. In that moment, something shifted between us. Not love, not yet, but a fragile bridge, real and trembling. And bridges like that, they always drew those who wanted to burn them. The days blurred into a tentative routine after her fever broke the cabin, transforming from a solitary refuge into something shared, however fragile. I'd rise at dawn, slipping out to check my snares and chop wood nearby, always keeping the house in sight. The forest felt different now, less empty, more watchful, as if it knew I'd brought in an outsider who carried her own storms. Kara stayed behind her strength, returning in fits and starts. She'd boil water, sort the greens and roots I'd gathered, and experiment with cooking in ways that were as foreign to me as her accent. Her early attempts were rough. She burned a pot of beans to charcoal-chopped carrots into chunks so large they barely softened in the broth, and salted everything like provisioning for a siege. Orcs eat to fuel the fight, she explained once without apology. But she observed, adapted. By the end of the week, her stews simmered with a depth I'd never achieved alone, richer spiced with herbs. She'd foraged herself, flavors that lingered on the tongue like a promise of more. In exchange, I showed her the villagers' methods, how to smoke meat over low fires to preserve it through winter, how to identify healing plants from my father's faded book Yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain. She taught me orc grips for a blade, turning my clumsy axe swings into something more precise, efficient. Hold it like an extension of your arm, she'd say, her large hand guiding mine. Not a tool, a part of you. Her touch was careful, never lingering, but it stirred something in me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Our conversations deepened in those quiet hours by the fire. One evening, as I mended a tear in her armor with rough stitches, she asked the question that had hung unspoken between us. "Taryn, why did you give me your last bread?" I paused, needle in hand, staring at the flickering flames. "Because I know what hunger does to a person. It hollows you out, makes you question if you're even alive. And because I couldn't save my father when I had the chance." She didn't press for details, but her nod carried understanding. "So you save others in his place?" "Perhaps." I asked about her world in return, probing gently. She spoke of orc culture, the unyielding honor codes, the clans bound by oaths stronger than blood, the rituals of strength that defined worth. "We live by the blade and the bond," she said. "Betrayal cuts deeper than any wound." Her words painted a picture of Ironreach, towering stone halls carved into mountains, feasts after battles where stories were currency, and a throne that demanded as much as it gave. But she held back the full truth until one night as rain hammered the roof like impatient fists. I'd caught her earlier, absently cleaning the metal bracelet on her wrist, its etchings gleaming under the light. Now she set down the history book she'd been puzzling over and met my eyes. "There's more," she said quietly. "Vorak seized the throne after our father's death. He eliminated threats, sisters married off to distant lords, brothers lost in accidents. I was next. He tried to wed me to a brutal old general, a puppet to control the border clans. When I refused, the assassins came. I leaned forward, the fire's heat suddenly oppressive. You fled then?" "Yes. I killed the first wave and ran with what I could carry, heading north to the Stonewater clan for alliance. But his hunters caught me at the border. The wound, it slowed me. I pushed into your woods' human lands where orcs are ghosts, thinking I'd die free at least. Anger flickered in me, not at her, but at the brother who'd hunt his own kin. Yet beneath it simmered frustration. Why hide this, the princess part, the throne?" Her gaze hardened, then softened. "If I'd told you from the start, you'd have seen the crown, not the starving woman under the oak. Trust. It's earned, not given." I wanted to rage at the deception, the danger she'd pulled into my life like a shadow. How dare she withhold something that could bring assassins or armies to my door? But staring at her, the firelight carving shadows on her green skin, I understood. In her place, hunted and alone, I'd guard my secrets too. Vulnerability wasn't a luxury for someone like her. The shift between us came subtly after that. Not fireworks or declarations, but small cracks in our walls. She laughed, actually laughed a low rumble like distant thunder when I burned my own stew one evening, mocking her early failures. Even woodcutters fail, she teased her tusks, flashing in a rare smile. I caught her reading, more often her fingers tracing the pages with a hunger for knowledge that mirrored my own quiet curiosities. Our brushes became less accidental, a hand on my shoulder as she passed, my fingers lingering when handing her a bowl. She polished the bracelet fully one afternoon, letting its royal insignia shine without shame. This was my father's, she said, a mark of Ironthorn blood. And now? I asked, sensing the weight. Now it's a reminder. If I reach Stonewater, perhaps I can rally them. If not, Vorak wins. Fear edged her voice, not for death, but for failure. In that moment I realized what was growing, not just alliance, but a bridge between two souls who'd learned not to trust. It wasn't love, not the bard's tales of instant passion, but something real, tentative, built on shared silences and small acts. Yet as I lay awake that night, listening to her steady breaths across the room, worry gnawed deeper. If she left, and she would to claim her path, I'd lose more than a companion. I'd lose the first person who'd seen me, not as the mill's cursed son, but as someone worth standing beside. And that terrified me more than any orc hunter ever could. The whispers from Eldermoor caught up faster than I'd hoped. With Kara healing but still not at full strength, our supplies had dwindled quicker than usual, 2 mouths to feed instead of 1. I had no choice but to head down to the village market for more extra salt flour and bandages to replace the ones soaked in her blood. It was a risk, but I figured if I kept my head down, no one would notice the larger haul. I was wrong. The market was its usual bustle, farmers hawking root vegetables, a blacksmith clanging away, children darting between stalls. I bartered my rabbit pelts for the goods, stuffing them into my sack without chit-chat, but eyes followed me. 3 men from the village fringes, burly types who'd always harbored grudges over the mill fire, lingered nearby, their stares like hooks. They'd never forgiven my family, and now seeing me buy enough for 2 suspicion, twisted their faces. On the way back, crossing the wooden bridge outside town, they blocked my path. No armor, no official business, just smirks and crossed arms. Heard the woodcutters feeding something in the woods, the leader, a thick-necked brute named Garrick, drawled. I'm not feeding anything, I said, trying to step around. So why the extra rations, herbs, bandages, like you're running a healer's hut? I kept silent, but that only fueled them. They shoved me back, fists flying before I could raise my arms. It wasn't a fair fight, 3-on-1, their blows landing heavy on my ribs, my jaw, my gut. I swung back, catching one in the shoulder, but they pinned me down, boots stomping into my side until I tasted blood. If you're hiding an orc boy, best hand it over before the whole village comes knocking, Garrick hissed before they sauntered off, leaving me in the mud. I dragged myself home as dusk fell, every breath a knife in my chest. My face throbbed, bruises blooming, but I schooled my expression before opening the door. Kara was by the hearth, stirring a pot, her movement steadier now. She glanced up and froze. Her eyes raked over me, taking in the split lip, the swelling cheek, the way I favored my left side. What happened? Slipped on the path. Nothing. Liar. She crossed the room in 2 strides, tilting my chin with a firm hand. When she saw the boot print blooming purple on my ribs, her expression turned thunderous tusks, bared in a silent snarl. Who did this? Villagers. Because of me. I chose to help you. She released me, her fist clenching so tight her knuckles paled. I'll find them. Make them pay. No. I snapped, sharper than intended. You go after them, and it'll bring the whole village here. Torches, pitchforks, the works. We don't need more enemies. She paced, her orcish temper coiling like a spring, but she stopped, exhaling slowly. You're right. For now. Her gaze softened just a touch. But no one touches what's under my protection. The words hung there, unspoken implications warming the air between us. I nodded, sinking onto the stool as she fetched herbs to tend my wounds, her hands gentle despite their size. That night passed uneasily, the cabin's walls feeling thinner under the weight of threats. Dawn broke with the clatter of hooves on the trail, a sound that set my heart pounding. I grabbed my axe, peering through the shutter. 4 orc riders approached, armored in matched plates etched with lightning motifs, moving in disciplined formation. Not raiders, not hunters, something organized. Kara heard it too. She stepped outside before I could stop her, her posture regal despite the lingering weakness. I followed axe in hand, ready for whatever came. The lead rider, a grizzled orc with silver-braided hair, dismounted swiftly and knelt on one knee. "Princess Kara, at last we've found you." I stiffened the title, hitting like a blow. Kara didn't flinch. "Droker, whose side are you on? Yours, as I swore to your father." He rose, glancing at me warily, but addressing her. "Iron Reach is fracturing. Vorak's grip weakens. Half the nobles whisper of rebellion. The clans await your return to challenge him and avert civil war." The words washed over me like cold rain. Princess, throne, rebellion. My run-down cabin shrank in that instant, too small for such grand shadows. I turned to Kara, betrayal stinging. "You hid this." She met my eyes, unflinching. "If I'd told you sooner, you'd have seen the title, not me, the starving one you fed." Droker shifted his men, scanning the tree line. "We must leave now, my lady. Vorak's bounty draws eyes everywhere. Staying invites death." Inner turmoil churned in me. Let her go back to her world of crowns and clans where I was nothing but a human woodcutter who'd stumbled into fate. Or what follow into Orkland's politics blood? My life was simple, poor, but mine. Yet glancing at Kara, her face a mask of resolve hiding flickers of fear, I knew parting would carve a hollow deeper than any wound. Before I could voice it, an arrow whistled from the woods, thudding into the porch post inches from Kara's head. Droker roared, drawing his sword. "Ambush!" 6 black-armored orcs burst from the tree's blades, gleaming no battle cries, just lethal intent. Vorak's assassins come to finish the job. Chaos erupted. Droker's men charged steel, clashing in a frenzy. An arrow streaked toward Kara. Instinct overrode thought. I lunged, shoving her down the shaft, grazing my shoulder in a blaze of pain. She cursed, grabbing a sword from one of Droker's fallen saddlebags. An assassin circled the cabin, aiming to flank us. I barred the back door with my axe heart slamming. He was bigger, faster, a trained killer. His blade swung. I parried with the handle, the impact numbing my arms. The second strike bit deep into my forearm, blood welling hot and fast. I staggered, vision blurring, thinking this was it. Then Kara appeared like a whirlwind, her borrowed sword arcing in a precise, deadly sweep. The assassin crumpled, lifeless. She whirled on me, chest heaving, eyes blazing with fury and something deeper. "Terran, you fool." "I know." The skirmish ended swiftly. Droker's team overwhelmed the attackers, 2 slain outright, 1 captured alive, the rest fleeing into the underbrush. But the air reeked of blood and finality. We'd crossed a threshold. Droker wiped his blade, surveying the damage. "They'll return in force. We leave at once." Kara nodded. But her gaze lingered on me, the cabin, the life we'd patched together. We had no choice now the storm had arrived, and staying meant death for us both. As I bound my wounds, resolve hardened in my chest. Whatever came next, we'd face it. But deep down, I knew leaving this place meant no turning back. We stepped back into the cabin one last time, the door creaking shut behind us like a final breath. The air inside felt thick with the scent of smoke and herbs, the remnants of our shared days clinging to every corner. Droker and his men waited outside, tending the horses and the captured assassin, their presence a stark reminder that our fragile haven was crumbling. Kara moved slowly, her eyes tracing the room, the uneven table where we'd shared meals, the hearth that had warmed her through fever, the worn book of histories left open on the shelf. She sat on the bed's edge, her posture straight but weary, and began to speak. Her voice was low, steady, unraveling the full tapestry she'd only hinted at before. "My father, King Drogath, died not of age or battle, but poison Vorak's doing, though he masked it as illness. The throne passed to him by right, but he knew we'd challenge it. My eldest sister was bartered away in marriage to a western lord silenced. My brother met his end on a hunt arrows meant for beasts, finding him instead. I was the loudest threat, beloved by the border guards, backed by the lesser clans. Vorak offered me as a bride to his cruelest general, a chain disguised as alliance. When I refused, the blades came in the night. I leaned against the wall, my fresh wounds throbbing, listening as she described the escape, slaying the first assassins in her chambers, grabbing the bracelet her father's sigil, and fleeing into the wilds. The pursuit at the border, the gash in her side from a poisoned blade, the desperate push into human lands where no orc would follow willingly. I aimed for Stonewater, she said, to rally them against him. But without me, Vorak will crush the loyal clans, sparking a war that bleeds Ironreach dry. Her words painted a world vast and vicious, far from my quiet woods. The cabin seemed even smaller now, its walls pressing in. I paced my mind, reeling. This wasn't my Fight Crown's clan's betrayals. I was a woodcutter scarred by a mill fire, forgotten by my own kind. Yet as I looked at her, the firelight dancing on her green skin, I saw how this place had woven us together. The bed where she'd lain, fevered the pot she'd scorched, learning to cook these were ours, brief as they were. Kara watched me, her amber eyes searching. Then she stood, closing the distance. I must return to Ironreach. Without me the fractures widen, and Vorak's hunters will come again, not just for me, but for you now. I nodded, throat tight. I know. A long silence stretched. When she spoke again, her voice stripped away the princess's armor, leaving only the woman I'd fed under the oak. But I don't want to leave without you. Not as a servant or a pawn in this game. Come with me, as the one I want beside me. If I reclaim the throne stand there, if I fall on the road, at least I'll have said this. Her words hit like a felled tree, heavy and unyielding. Me in orc halls amid warriors and intrigue, I laughed bitterly, rubbing my bandaged arm. You're asking a poor woodcutter to chase a throne with an orc princess. I'm asking the man who saw me starving and chose to share his last bread. I turned away, staring at the hearth's dying embers. My life flashed before me, the mill's ashes, the villagers scorn the endless solitude. Safe, small, but empty. What she offered was a chasm war prejudice death. Orcs would see me as weak and intruder. Her kin might kill me for daring to stand near her. Fear coiled in my gut, cold and real. I'm afraid... I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer, her hand resting on my shoulder, warm, steady. So am I. That simple truth shattered something in me. No grand vows, no illusions of heroism. Just two souls, scarred and uncertain, facing the unknown. I turned, taking her hand in mine. It dwarfed my own, calloused and strong, yet it fit. Then we'll go together. For the first time, her smile broke fully, transforming her face, fierce pride softened by genuine warmth. We gathered what little I owned, my axe spare clothes, my father's few books, memories of this place packed into a worn sack. Outside, Droker nodded approvingly as we mounted up Kara, sharing a horse with me until we could find another. We left Thornhollow as shadows lengthened, heading north toward the jagged peaks of Ironreach, the forest swallowing our trail. The journey was grueling. We skirted human patrols, forded icy rivers camped in hidden glens, where whispers of pursuit kept us vigilant. Droker's men eyed me warily at first, a human among orcs, an oddity. But as days passed, small acts bridged the gap I shared. Foraging knowledge mended a torn saddle, stood watch without complaint. Kara's presence silenced outright hostility. Her word carried weight. Crossing into orc lands shifted everything. Ironreach loomed like a fortress of black stone halls hewn from mountains' banners snapping in the wind. I was stared at, spat upon, human worm, princess's pet. Whispers followed, weak, unworthy. Kara shielded me where she could, but the court demanded proof. I faced trials, a test of strength against a warrior twice my size I lost, but endured riddles from elders testing wit. I solved two, earning grudging nods and the worst public scorn in the great hall where nobles mocked my blood, my poverty. Why him? They jeered. I stood silent, meeting their eyes, drawing on the resolve I'd found in that cabin. Kara's challenge culminated in a duel to the death before the assembled clans. Vorak, smug on his stolen throne, accepted arrogant, underestimating her fire. The arena echoed with clashes. She fought like a storm, her blade a blur. He fell, his blood staining the stone, exiled to the eastern wastes in defeat rather than death mercy, she called it, to prevent more division. In the grand hall of Blackstone, before tribe leaders and soldiers, Kara claimed the throne. Cheers rose like thunder. Then she turned to me, pulling me forward. This man, she declared, shared his last bread when I was nothing but a starving fugitive, not for gold, not for power, but because he saw me. He stands beside me not by right of blood, but by choice. Murmurs rippled, but her gaze silenced them. In that moment, I wasn't a hero from tales. I was just Taryn, who'd chosen not to walk past a woman in need. Our story spread softening edges between orcs and humans' trade pacts' uneasy alliances. But if asked where it truly began, I'd always say the same an afternoon at Thornhollow's edge when an orc woman looked at me and said, "I have eaten nothing for many days." And I chose not to pass by.